This is a topic I am extremely passionate about, and I'm really, really glad to have a chance to talk about it here. I actually think team culture is everything. I think it's the foundation of everything that we do, and this, in fact, is a picture from just south of the Taimyr Peninsula in central Siberia. It was the first Siberian field trip that we took, and that was the project where I started really thinking about what it meant to be a good team member, because boy, oh boy, you do not want to be in the middle of Siberia for several weeks with a whiny, bitter, complainy person. You gotta have everybody there together. It's Cambrian limestones and the Kotoy River in Siberia. So what is team culture? It's by definition, it's the display of behaviors. Culture is self-perpetuating. This is something that was one of the first things that I realized, but there was a coterie of difficult faculty members. And I bet when I say that, you all have somebody in mind, right? I mean, there's always somebody who, is more difficult to get along with. And everybody kept saying, well, when so-and-so retires, then we'll all be happy. But of course, that's not what happens. Culture is something that's owned within the community. And so it needs to be actively changed because people perpetuate it. And so how we decide to get along is something that we've got to decide on and then enforce. I was actually a little shocked when I learned that. I kept thinking that, passively, the future would be different. But the future isn't different unless you're active. So why does positive team culture matter? It's like in natural sciences, we're often taught that our emotional response to our research is irrelevant and in fact distracting and negative, and that we should just get on with the work of it. But it turns out that there are really good economic reasons why positive culture matters. And so one of them is that we make better decisions when we're in a positive culture. There are a whole bunch of studies on this, but my new favorite one, it was an Israeli medical school study where they were doing emergency medicine for infants, and this was I don't know what the right term is. It wasn't real life. It was like a case study. They were practicing. There were no actual infant lives at stake, but they divided the emergency room doctors into two groups, and then the two groups had differently behaving team leaders. And one of them was a positive, we can do it kind of team leader, and the other one was a sort of harsh, maybe militaristic, a bit bullying. And the bullied team regularly made devastating mistakes to the point that they caused the imaginary deaths of their imaginary patients, whereas the positive team did not. And so we actually make better decisions when we're together as a team. Project risk is reduced. If you have a fear or an unwillingness to interact with your colleagues, then you're not going to bring forward risk. And the biggest example of the importance of this that I have is, in fact, the Psyche mission. We worked extremely hard on our team culture from the beginning. And by the time we'd been working on this project for 6 years, and we made it through to the second stage of the proposal process, and we ended up at our site visit where the NASA review panel was sitting here, and the team was all here, and we were presenting one after the other. And we had 140 people on the team at that point. We hadn't even been selected yet. It was a big team. Tremendous amount of pressure, the industry partner, the NASA center, all the people, and then review panel could tell that we had a positive team culture. We would hand off questions to each other. We would talk to each other on the side, and they decided that was a significant contributor to the likely success of our mission, because if the junior person is afraid to tell the senior person that they think that they did it in metric instead of English units, then it's never going to be fixed and the lander's going to be lost on Mars. And so if you have a culture where the senior people listen to the junior people and where the first reaction is not a negative reaction, then you have a much higher chance of success. Attraction and retention of talent. I found both with the Psyche mission and also in CC, the reputation of having a positive culture gets out there, and we actually have people coming and wanting to work with us for that reason. And finally, something that I think really, really matters, any kind of rudeness or bullying actually reduces diversity. People say that you should increase diversity by changing your hiring rubric, but it does not matter how many people hired come in if they don't feel like they can stay. And so what's the number? Around 25% of people who you feel are like you, it takes for you not to feel like an outsider. And so everyone who has fewer than about a 25% cohort feels isolated. And if that makes them feel vulnerable and it's a negative culture, they're very likely to leave. And so having a positive culture is a direct route to getting a diverse workforce. So these are some of the reasons why it really matters. Other than just, wouldn't it be great to always feel happy when you go to work? And I know that a lot of you do, and I do, and I think we can all think of places where that's not true. So what are some aspects of positive culture that I think are important? Criticism cannot be the sole purpose of a comment. Now this goes antithetical to how we're trained as scientists, right? We're trained to be critics of each other, we're trained to be critics of ourselves, but that can't be the only reason that you're saying something, just because it's reflexive. That's the first thing. A single negative comment has a disproportionately strong effect. One study I read said that in a small group committee, like 6 people, for example, a search committee, one person says a negative comment to bring everyone else's attitude about that person back to neutral, whoever the negative comment was aimed against, the candidate presumably. It takes 5 positive comments to bring somebody back to neutral. So it's not just, I think this person has a weak publishing record for someone who is 4 years out of their PhD. You know, that person is sunk unless you have 5 more positive comments after it. And so thinking really hard about that, kind of how you use language, is important. The bottom line is everyone should be treated with the same respect no matter what their discipline or position is. And this is something else I've become very passionate about on Psyche Mission, because a lot of times in aerospace, the engineers are king and queen, but mostly king. So our mantra on Psyche team is that everyone is there because we need their expertise, because if we didn't need their expertise, they wouldn't be on the team. And so everyone is equally valued, everyone is equally invited to meetings, and everyone is equally listened to. And I think that in general, we all do better if we do that. I think one way to change culture, frankly, is to assert it. So this is a great quote from Jonas Salk. The object is not to put down the other, but to raise up the other. That's our little house in Western Massachusetts. That's actually the woodshed, not the house. I'm standing with the house to the back of me. But again, this is not how we're brought up in academia. You know, if you're brought up in academia, somebody else's win is fundamentally your loss. And so we have to get over that feeling in order to really work together well as teams. So here are some leadership attributes that I think are very important and that I look for when I try to find somebody who's a candidate. Somebody who administers fairly, ethically, promptly, and efficiently, who ignores personal bias when making decisions. That's a really hard one. We've all got implicit bias, but we have to actually try to get over it consciously. Acts with dignity, courtesy, and patience. It doesn't matter what role you're in. I think that you can be calm and polite all the time. I'm not saying that I am. I'm just saying it's a, aspiration. Why not, right? It's an aspiration. Effectively manages administrative responsibilities. As we know, some people are great visionaries, but they can't actually get the daily schedule done. So it's good to have sort of both of those skills. All right, here's a hard one. Conducts the difficult conversations and makes the hard decisions. This is one of the reasons why academic units that have constantly rotating internal heads and chairs, I think, run into trouble. Because it is very hard to sit down with your colleague and say, for example, you may not talk to this other person using that language, and if it happens again, we're going to really do something about it. When you know that next time around, that person's going to be your boss. That makes it hard. But you've got to be willing to have those hard conversations and make those hard decisions, and you need to find someone who's willing to do that. And here's, I think, the heart of it all. You have to be genuinely happy when someone else succeeds. And this really, just to say it again, this is not how academicians are trained. But I think that it is a prerequisite of a successful leader. I just really liked this. The way that others perceive you determines your ability to influence a situation. And they found that there are 2 major axes to your ability to influence. One is warmth, and the other is competence. Warmth, again, is not something that gets talked about a lot in academia, but you know what? It's really important. And I thought this gave great insight, this little graphic. And as we think about people who are influencers in our world, each of our worlds, we can kind of place where they would be on this. And it's a way to also try to calibrate yourself and change your own behavior, and to try to think about who you might like to be your next leader. Where would they go? This is not a topic that gets talked about enough. It's people call these soft skills, but I think they're much harder. And I also think that they're critical. And another way that you see the criticality of this is that even Elon Musk, who's famously one of the toughest of the tough guys, said that they were making mistakes early on because they were not hiring people for these 21st century skills of ability to communicate and work in teams. And now they are, because they find that's actually one of the most important attributes of a person. All right, so leadership actions. This is my finger and what I assume is a quail track. Something that I started doing is talking frequently about the importance of civil behavior, collegiality, and an intolerance of harassment. I think that asserting that these are our values and asserting that this is the way we behave over and over again and then enforcing it, I think that's a nice combination of things. Make sure everyone is aware of available resources. Show support for team members. Model what it is to help out somebody who's in a less powerful position. Something I think is incredibly important in academia is to actually spend time with every faculty member, because I think that as a director, that is the job of the director, to make sure that they know exactly what everyone's doing and what they need. And so for the first 3 years that I was here, I spent a half hour alone with every faculty member. We had like 65 people. So. And I can do that on Psyche Mission with all of the key leadership, have what JPL calls quiet hours, just to hear from them what they're worried about, just to hear what the problems are. I would suggest regular meetings, a lot of celebrating successes. Celebrating successes, underrated, really important. Have meals together. And then finally, try to say yes. A lot of academic institutions are no organizations. And I think it's incumbent upon leadership and management both to try to say yes. I think that's key. So let's see. Creating your culture. I don't know if you can see what this is a picture of, but this is a coyote track overprinting a deer track. So the coyote was chasing the deer through the snowstorm. They took that out in the same place where the woodshed is. This is really interesting. I actually have been teaching a little workshop for postdocs and junior faculty, just like a 2-hour thing, about what is the difference between leadership and management, and starting with create your culture by basing it on your values. Like, talk about what are your values and make a decision about what they are individually, each person. State it explicitly, put it in writing. I actually think it's great for academic departments to put in their mission statement, this is the culture that we go for. We aim to be a collegial faculty. We aim that as people become senior, they use their power to support others and not just for themselves. So here's an example. Being a collegial faculty where people are happy to come to work, committed to civil discourse, committed to improving diversity and equality, committing to the team and the use of power to help others. There's a truth that happens when you're trying to do big interdisciplinary projects, which is that the people have to believe that the success of the team is more important than their own personal success and prominence. And I think that's like an improv topic idea, right? That you have to make the company look good. And that's not what we're taught usually in academia, but to make a big team work, it has to happen. Organization. This, I think, is a fundamental human thing that in our brain stems, we live in villages. And when you make a boundary between two groups, I think you automatically make a competition between those groups. And so I think it's very important to make as flat and equal an organization as you possibly can to avoid that kind of internecine warfare. I think it's particularly critical when you're trying to divide up resources or make common decisions. The biggest message here, the thing that I care about most, is this idea that a big external goal has the power to bring a team together. A big vision is more energizing and creates more optimism and more likely to create people to support each other to attain it. When you're sort of fighting for scraps, of course, you're going to have internecine warfare. And what I imagine in my mind is always, if you just have a group of people who are constrained and surrounded by people with whom they're not sharing or collaborating, you can imagine all their little vectors of activity kind of bumping into each other and creating chaos. But if you've got a goal over there and everybody's heading that way, then you're getting along with your neighbor and you're making bigger progress. And I think that's a really key concept. The traditional academic model that has served us really well for a millennium is the pyramid model, where the senior person is the owner of the topic at that institution and presides over a pyramid of people who more or less serve that topic. This model really got us really far. And for some people in particular areas, it still works really well. But I think in general, it does not serve our future for a number of reasons. One is that it sets you up into an ego model, where one of the ways that you protect your ideas and your field is by fighting off all comers and trying to accrue the prizes to yourself. That is really bad for interdisciplinary work. You tend not to really want to give away any of the glory to the greater team. And it's also very, very bad for diversity and inclusion, because that person owns that pyramid, and if they're not a good actor, it's hard to control things. And we've seen that all around us all the time. And so one of the things we're doing in Interplanetary Initiative is we're trying to get away from that model. Here's our experiment on how to set up a research team. Get everybody in the room together. The first time we did it, we had 65 people from all over the university, all different kinds of positions, and we brainstormed what the biggest questions are that we could possibly answer, that we would need to answer for, in this case, for our future of humans in space. Questions like, what will the social and legal norms be when we have side-by-side settlements on Mars? Like the big questions that need to be answered that you probably couldn't do by yourself, or sometimes you couldn't even do it in your lifetime. And then we voted on them, democracy in action. And then we took the top 10 questions and we invited people to voluntarily form teams around them. We did this all in one afternoon. And then asked them to set 1-year milestones. What could you do toward this goal that we could do with this pilot funding in 1 year? Then we chose a leader. And then we funded them and gave them all project managers. So they're all project managed. So the idea is to organize around a big question instead of around a big person. And what we found, which kind of shocked me, I thought everyone would go home. It was May. I figured I wouldn't hear from anybody. By September, we had our first peer-reviewed paper. Everybody worked like mad all summer because they were so energized to be in these teams. We haven't lost a single team. I've been really happy with this. And so it's an experiment in a different way to put together a research group. So finally, just a tiny bit of advice. Be bold and be kind. I used to think that kindness was a sign of weakness, but now I think that it's just what we should all do all the time. Thanks a lot for listening.